Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue with our conversation with former Secretary John Kerry. You spent a tremendous amount of time working to get this deal with Iran for them to freeze their nuclear program. President Trump said it's the worst deal he's ever seen.
Yeah, but just saying that doesn't make it that. This is the toughest agreement in terms of inspection, accountability. No country has had to do what Iran did in order to live up to this. But to just walk away while Russia, China, France, Germany, and Britain are all trying to keep this agreement in place. Only the United States walked away. Only Donald Trump. His defense secretary thought he should keep it. The Secretary of State that he got rid of thought he should keep it. His intelligence people thought he should keep it. The fact is, this agreement is working.
And you tried to save this deal
States. Yes, I did.
Behind the scenes.
Well, I tried.
And that really angered President Trump. You were calling other foreign ministers. You even spoke with Javad Zarif.
Well, at that point in time, the policy of the United States was still to support that agreement.
But the president thought you were trying to undermine him.
No, I was trying to have the policy of the United States of America, which was part of the agreement, to continue and common sense to continue. I didn't negotiate. I spoke out. And I will always exercise my right to speak out.
But President Trump would say he was elected on a platform of exiting this deal, and he went out and attacked you personally because of the phone calls you were making.
I don't put any stock in that at all.
He said John Kerry never walked away from the table except to be in that bicycle race where he fell and broke his leg. That's it.
I did walk away. And we almost walked away on 2 or 3 other occasions where we thought it was necessary. So he really, unfortunately, and I say this sadly, you know, more often than not, he really just doesn't know what he's talking about. He makes things up. And he's making that up, as he has other things.
Didn't you want to say something at the time? Tweet back at him, at President Trump, when he attacks you?
I haven't yet. I think America and our democracy are more thoughtful than dishonest tweets.
Do you think President Trump's unpredictability is or can be an asset?
I would never say no to that. But unpredictability that destroys 70 years of a strongly defended message, such as NATO, or unpredictability with respect to what your policy is with respect to nuclear weapons or disarmament or whatever, or Russia, is not a good thing. There are certain times where unpredictability invites an overreach by a country.
Our full interview with Secretary Kerry is available on our website, facethenation.com. Secretary Kerry's book was published by Simon & Schuster, which we should mention is a division of CBS. Joining us now for some political analysis, Edward Wong is a diplomatic and international correspondent for the New York Times. Selena Zito reports for the Washington Examiner, is a columnist for the New York Post, and is also a CNN contributor. Margaret Talev is the senior White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. She's also a CNN political analyst. And Kelsey Snell is a congressional reporter for NPR. Welcome to Face the Nation. Ed, let's start off with you. Secretary Kerry there basically laying out his regrets about Syria. We know today the Secretary of State now, Mike Pompeo, is warning 3 million people are at risk in Idlib, Syria, of imminent disaster. The Pope is warning about this. The UN is warning about this. What is the Trump administration doing about it?
Well, the Trump administration officials say that they've, various people like Pompeo, Mattis, have spoken to their counterparts and to Russian officials about this. But if you look at the Trump policy, it's not that different than Obama's policy. And so far, we haven't seen any action that would really push back against a large Assad military action or backed by Russians and by Iranians. And so I think that Assad won't feel a compunction to really hold back. I think Idlib province is the very last holdout of the rebels, and he's going to push ahead with whatever offensive he has lined up.
So despite the tough rhetoric against Iran, the group they're backing, and Assad, is winning this war, and the U.S. is not doing anything to stop this slaughter.
Right. I think that we saw Trump do a symbolic action earlier in his administration. He fired the missiles on the airfield in Syria, but that didn't hold Assad back. And unless there are tougher actions on Assad and on his allies, we won't see him holding back at all.
But they have warned, right, that they're willing to do that. And Bolton sent that message very clearly
if there's use of chemical weapons.
If there are use of chemical weapons, that it would be not just equal to, but more significant than the previous attack. But it really is in conflict with the administration's desire to get out of Syria, which they've also been trying to negotiate, if possible, if the Russians are willing to make commitments about Iran. So these are two policy goals in real conflict.
You know, I had a former Obama administration official say to me, policy's not that different. We just felt bad about it, which is an incredibly cynical way of looking at what is happening on the ground right now. Margaret, I want to ask you just right off the top, the publication you work for, Bloomberg News, you just had an extended sit down with President Trump.
It was amazing.
And it sparked its own controversy. The president now attacking Bloomberg for what he is claiming was leak of off-the-record information. Bloomberg's denied it. The reporter who printed it came from a different publication. You have not violated that off-the-record standard in the course of your comments, I know. But what can you explain to us about what happened?
And I should also add, the Canadian reporter also has said that without identifying who a source is, it wasn't us. So we had an interview with the president. We had talked to the White House and said, our readers have a big interest in the economy. We'd love to do this going into the Labor Day weekend. And they granted us an interview. We were supposed to go about 20 minutes. The president said he was feeling intellectually stimulated. And so we were thrilled to get about double the time. We had 45, 50 minutes in the Oval Office with him. And we covered, you know, the waterfront, basically everything from NAFTA to North Korea to Jeff Sessions and midterm politics. And on the subject of NAFTA, what he told us on the record was that maybe they get a deal with the Canadians by the next day, by Friday. Maybe it would be in sort of the near future, but either way, he was convinced that the Canadians would come along. I have no idea how the Canadian reporter got any information that he published, and because we honor off-the-record agreements, I can't talk about what the president might have said off the record.
But to be clear, you have a transcript of the full conversation, and the White House has a transcript of the full interview.
Yes.
So those are the two places where record exists.
Those are.
The specific place that the president confirmed these off-the-record comments, because he tweeted about them, the specific area was about NAFTA.
That's right.
Policy-wise, where are we with that? Because just yesterday, the president let off a flurry of tweets saying he might, after all, withdraw from the agreement that his administration says he had intended to sign on to again.
Yeah, the president and the White House feel and say that they feel that they have the leverage over Canada ultimately going into this. But as you know, they've set off sort of this 30-day time clock because of the Mexican president, Mr. Peña Nieto's kind of expiration date in office. And they are trying to pressure Canada into signing on now to a trilateral pact or else forcing it into two pieces. And so he's got basically till the end of September to get Canada on board, right? To make it easy through Congress to make this happen.
Not just easy, it might be impossible to add Canada later if they don't get the final text to Congress within the 30-day window. That was started on Friday, and Congress has been telling the White House about this for some time, so this is not new information to the White House.
What's interesting is if you look at domestic politics in Canada, there's not a lot of incentive for the Trudeau administration to really sign on immediately. I mean, his sort of anti-Trump stance has been popular with the Canadian constituency, and they also have a bilateral agreement on trade between Canada and the U.S. that they can fall back on.
And the reason this matters is because this is such key trade to so many U.S. states.
Absolutely.
And
corporate executives have been pressuring the president for a while now. Keep this as a three-part deal, whatever you call it, or a lot of jobs, including in the U.S., could be a risk.
When you look at, you know, the states that I cover, the Midwest states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're all stepping back and looking at this. This is a lot of the reason why a lot of these voters came towards him and in how he conducts these negotiations.
all right, we're going to take a moment and come back on the other side of this break. Stay with us. And we are back with more from our panel. Kelsey, let me talk to you about this sense of hope coming out of Senator McCain's memorial service, this emphasis, country over party, bipartisanship. We kind of get a test of that on Tuesday, right? When Congress heads into session to start these proceedings to confirm Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Will anyone remember the sense of civility that they are being called to behave?
Well, we're already seeing on Twitter and from statements from organizations on both the left and the right trying to pressure people away from that bipartisanship. We're seeing, particularly on the progressive side, there are a number of activist groups who are saying that Democrats should simply walk out and not attend these hearings. That's not something that Democrats in the Senate really want. They don't want that pressure because they say they take this very seriously. And the process of confirming a justice who will have a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court is something where they want to be in the room. But again, progressive activists are aghast about this argument about not just the documents. There's been a big fight, I'm sure, as we've discussed in the past, that they want more documents related to Kavanaugh's time in public service, particularly his time in the White House. And Democrats say they haven't received enough, and Republicans say they've gone far out of their way to make sure that they produce more documents than any other justice nominee has ever, they've ever seen. This fight is really gearing up progressives, and they feel like they are losing a battle against, filling the court. And they worry that the Trump administration is putting a stamp on not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts for generations to come.
And talking about walking out, because basically when it comes to votes, this is a fait accompli. Republicans have the numbers, right?
It's not clear yet. There are a number of people who have not yet said how they are going to vote. Republicans like to think that it's a fait accompli, but progressives say that they could still pressure some people in the middle to change their minds if they're able to kind of get the public more engaged.
Mm-hmm. Selena, how much does this resonate with the voters you talk to?
Well, for a lot of voters, in particular evangelical voters, their decision to finally vote for President Trump was on the Supreme Court. His ability to pick someone that's conservative for the Supreme Court. He put that Federalist list out when he was running, and this is where a lot of them, went from their reservations to, okay, I'm going to vote for this guy. They're very energized and excited about this. This is something they're going to be watching, and I will say, I think one of the most vibrant things that we do in Congress is to watch I'm old enough to remember, like, the Bork, when Judge Bork went through the process. These are one of the most vibrant things that Congress does. But, Trump voters are going to be watching this. They're excited about it, and they're hopeful that he gets across. And I think it actually helps entice some voters who are going to stay home in November because they're exhausted to maybe come back out because they got that win that they wanted.
Margaret, is this something that the White House feels confident that they can get those votes?
I think on balance they do. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh is well within the mainstream of conservative background judges. He's served for a long time in the Bush administration. There are a lot of documents available about him. He is someone you could see being nominated by a different mainstream Republican president. And part of the question about privilege really does go to his time inside a White House. There's a pretty long-standing pattern of privilege. Also, as a side note, there's a lawyer named Bill Burke who's getting a ton of work because he's President Bush's lawyer, as well as Don McGahn's lawyer,
right,
as well as a bunch of the lawyers for former
Steve Bannon's lawyer, right?
Yes, administration officials who may now be a target of other stuff. So, but look, even so, it's obviously incredibly important to the president to get this done, and there are a lot of people that he's glad to be done with who will be gone also after this confirmation. So for those political reasons, as well as the prize of the court, and after all, he's the president. He won an election. Elections have consequences. Yep. He has the power to fill spots on the Supreme Court when they come open.
Selena, I put Margaret on the hot seat at the get-go. I'm going to ask you personally as well to respond to what has been some criticism of your journalism. The Huffington Post coming out with an article specifically about you, saying you didn't identify a Republican in a story specifically as a Republican official, and called into question a lot of your work. I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. As you can imagine, this has been an interesting week for me. It all began through a series of tweets by an anonymous troll. And as the internet goes, it just expands and expands and expands. I addressed with the questions that were asked to Ashley, and also I put my own personal tweet out there addressing each issue that this anonymous person did. My editors have reviewed everything that I work for and all the places news organizations I work for, and they stand behind my work, and so do I.
And you will be, I think, detailing some of this in the coming days beyond this conversation here. You also, though, have touched on, or you mentioned some of the social media outcry. There's been this outcry and some fundraising on behalf of Republican congressmen, particularly Kevin McCarthy, on this idea that social media companies are censoring conservatives.
Yeah.
Is there anything to that you have experienced?
Sure. I had a story that I wrote for the New York Post a day or two after Cohen and Manafort had their, lovely little legal issues come out, where I went out and I talked to Trump voters to see, does this change you? Does this take you away? And within 24, I wrote the story, I posted it, and in the morning it was gone. There was a notice that said it did not meet Facebook's community standards. I received a flurry of direct messages and emails and so forth from people who also posted the story and said, hey, I put your story up and it's gone. It's marked as spam or not meeting community standards. And that was just a straight story. But the New York Post is considered a conservative publication. I work for two conservative news organizations, along with the Washington Examiner, and there is that impression that happens.
And social media companies deny that there's censorship. Kelsey, there's going to be some hearings, though, with the Twitter CEO in particular answering questions this coming week.
Yeah.
How much of an issue is this going to be?
I imagine it's going to be a huge issue. We're already seeing it telegraphed from many Republican offices that they expect to talk about this very directly with the CEO. I would expect, though, that this may not get as much coverage because it's going to be happening at the same time as the Kavanaugh hearing. So I will be interested to see how which thing breaks through on that day.
Ed, we had some mixed messages coming from the Trump administration on North Korea policy. The president saying he blames China for any kind of progress being stalled right now with denuclearizing North Korea. Is there anything to that? And are we stopping or are we continuing military exercises? Because the defense secretary seems to be saying something slightly different than the president.
Well, I think that we saw Trump then rebut any idea that there might be a reopening of military exercises. He came on and said on Twitter that military exercises are still on hold right now. And I think that will be the policy until it changes.
Well said.
On the trade war thing about China, I think he's basically just trying to find a reason to sort of justify the continuing trade war, which doesn't seem like it'll end anytime soon. When I talk to Trump administration officials, they say that China has actually been playing ball with sanctions on North Korea. Chinese banks have not violated the sanctions rules. In general, those sanctions are still in place. China is abiding by them. And so I think they're looking for a reason to explain the stalling on the diplomacy.
All right, Ed, thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment. Later today, Senator John McCain will be buried at the Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis next to his best friend, Chuck Larson, following a final private funeral at the Naval Academy Chapel. Following the burial, there will be a flyover in the Missing Man Formation. This will mark the end of 5 days of events honoring the Arizona senator. Here's a look back at the events leading up to today.
He taught me that honor and imperfection are always in competition. I do not cry for a perfect man. I cry for a man who had honor and always was willing to admit to his imperfection.
We ask for an added measure of thy Spirit to be with John's sweet family, who have sacrificed so much for so long in sharing their loving husband and father with us for these many years. Was grace that taught
My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democrat. And I love John McCain. I always thought of John as a brother. We had a hell of a lot of family fights
Many people might wonder what a young African-American kid from Minnesota and a highly decorated Vietnam War hero turned United States Senator might have in common. I'm black, he was white. I'm young, he wasn't so young. How does this unlikely pair become friends? That's just who he is. Over the several years I had the privilege of spending time with Senator McCain, sometimes it was just a visit to our practices. Other times it was him texting and saying, "Oh, you need to pick it up this Sunday."
Rarely does this glorious rotunda fall silent at this hour. On a day like this, John would usually be bounding this way or that way, right through here, visitors turning to each other, asking if that's who they think it is. But in this quiet hour, we are left to ponder how his life speaks to us. This is one of the bravest souls our nation has ever produced.
That's perhaps how we honor him best, by recognizing that there are some things bigger than party or ambition or money or fame or power, that there's some things that are worth risking everything for. At his best, John showed us what that means. For that, we are all deeply in his debt.
None of us will ever forget how even in his parting, John has bestowed on us a much-needed moment of unity and a renewed faith in the possibilities of America.
One of his books ended with the words, "And I moved on." John has moved on. He would probably not want us to dwell on it, but we are better for his presence among us. The world is smaller for his departure, and we will remember him as he was, unwavering, undimmed, unequal.
Oh, Daddy boy, oh, Daddy boy, I love you so.
That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.